And get started with our Education and Culture Committee meeting. I wanted to welcome a special guest that we have, Miss Ava Jawando, to the dais. So thank you very much, Ava, for joining us. If folks don't know, today is Take Your Child to Work Day. Council President Navarro and I were remembering the days when our children were still little and were interested in sitting with us. As I looked back at Facebook memories this morning of my children when they used to think that Daddy's job was kind of interesting, now it's nothing but of the sort. I want to welcome you to our work session on Montgomery County Public Schools FY20 operating budget and our CIP follow-up. As always, I want to thank our senior legislative analyst, Mr. Craig Howard, for his great work in summarizing what we have before us as a part of this budget, as well as what some of our decision points are today. I did just want to highlight that we do have a follow-up work session where we will go into greater detail and make some final decisions on May 2nd, and then another potential meeting that may happen after that as well to do some cleanup, but I'll let Mr. Howard talk about that a little bit. We are today joined by our President of the Board of Education, Shebra Evans, as well as Dr. Jack Smith, our Superintendent of Schools. We've got Nikki Diamond, our Chief Financial Officer, and Bruce Meyer from our Office of Management and Budget. So welcome, everyone. Let me just start off by saying before we begin, it's been widely reported in the media, and I think it was clear yesterday that this council and myself are adamant about making sure that we provide the funding necessary for our schools to continue to do the great work that they're doing. I will continue to say we are making progress in our equity and opportunity gap in Montgomery County Public Schools, contrary to what some people may want our community to believe. We are making progress in terms of access, and we are making progress in terms of performance. Both of those things we have made strides. Have we made enough? Certainly not. And I know in partnership with Dr. Smith, as we went around in our education budget forums, it's very clear that we still have more work to do. But we have to acknowledge the fact that we are doing great things in our schools that are making a difference for our kids who need it the most. And that's important too. I mean, it's very interesting, and I wasn't going to comment on this, but I think I shall. The school system is being sued because folks think that we're doing too much to support those children who need the most support, more than some of the folks who might not need as much support. So for those who assume or say that the school system's not doing anything, it's quite obvious they are. So much so, in fact, that folks think that they are somehow maybe losing as a result. I do want to call attention to the superintendent's words that he used, which I think are incredibly important, and that nobody's looking for mediocre equity. That excellence in equity means that everyone should be excelling and everyone should be supported, and we rise all boats, not just some. Not just the ones that are struggling in the high seas, but also those that are on calm water and are continuing to move on, smooth sailing ahead. Everyone's supported in this system. I see it with my children. I know that all of us have seen it with our children. And so from that perspective, I just want to say thank you for the great work that continues to be done, and thank you for the continued partnership with us in making sure that we're working to achieve positive results for all of our kids within Montgomery County Public Schools. That is why this budget is so important to me. That is why this project is so important to my colleagues on the committee. And it's also why it's so important to all of us in the council and in this greater Montgomery County community. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Howard, but I'll ask Dr. Smith if you wanted to make any opening remarks, and then Ms. Evans if you wanted to make any opening remarks as well.
No, so thank you for having us here, and I really appreciate you all I'm glad that I'm a Montgomery County resident. I am glad to be on the school board, but most importantly, I am very happy that I have kids that are in the school system. I have to think about what President Navarro said yesterday about being a former school board member and going to the national school board conferences. You know, you do hear from a lot of public school districts, and it's not like it is here. I mean, are we where we want to be? We're not. We are steadily making those strides, but this is the place that I want to be. I'm appreciative that you are a product of Montgomery County Public School Systems, that you both have had children go through the system. You currently have children in the school system. We have a council member, Jawanda, who has children here today. We do all that we do for the little Avas, right? We want to make certain that we have opportunity and access for all of our students. I thank you for the press conference yesterday for assuring us that you believe in public education and that you will do all that you can to help us to continue to provide that access and that opportunity for our students. So that's all I want to say today. I'm just very appreciative that we have elected officials who know what it means to have a quality public school system, and I believe that with you all. So thank you.
Good morning. I too would like to echo my appreciation for the leadership of Council President Navarro and you as the chair of the Education Committee, Council Member Rice, as well as Mr. Jawando and all the other council members who consistently speak on behalf of high-quality, excellent education for every child in Montgomery County, and that commitment is always clear. I would point out to, you know this already well, but I'll point it out to the rest of the world who might hear about this. What we're talking about here is actually a very small percentage of our budget. When the budget went to Mr. Elridge, the vast majority, well over 99%, was sent to you. And then you stepped in and said immediately, how can we work together for this? And I don't want to in any way diminish that, because what we're talking about is funds that hardworking people are paying through their taxes. But as a percentage, it's a small percentage. And it does make a difference in what we can continue to expand and extend to all of our students, and especially the maintenance of the high level of excellence we've had, and more importantly, progress for everyone, because that is our economic and our social future in this community, that everyone have excellence, and that's an equitable excellence. That's the only real kind there is. So I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to work together to just do what we need to do as the General Assembly does its work and as you do your work. But the folks in Montgomery County need to know that this county government is by far the biggest funder of public education, both capital and construction and operating budget, by far over most every school system in the state. When you look at what Montgomery County provides for the operation of the school system, that is an important point that doesn't get said often enough. So thank you very much.
Council President Navarro.
No, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for so many years of leading this committee and always looking for every single opportunity to articulate and to be able to frame why it is that is so critical that no matter how much money, no matter what the gap is, I am very mindful of the fact that you do deliberate very carefully, and you have been very, very strategic in how to use those dollars. And, for people who want to simplify what's happening in the school system, I say that it is quite startling to see the growth in enrollment. It is quite amazing, again, to step out of sort of the Montgomery County bubble and compare what's happening in other jurisdictions across the country, and have to really acknowledge that, when you do allow a school system to begin to deteriorate, then it is very, very difficult to bring it back. And so that's why we're always so vigilant about addressing whatever issues there may be. But what I like about what I'm seeing right now, what the board is deliberating and deciding, and what the superintendent is leading, is this notion of innovation and really looking at so many opportunities to leverage what we have in place, hear what the students are telling you, and really stepping up to do this. So to me, that's really exciting work, and we are privileged that we can do that. because in so many jurisdictions, you are so busy just trying to deal with all of the dysfunction that you can't even have the luxury of thinking about how to leverage, how to innovate, how to, realign and move forward. So that is really exciting work. And I've said for years and years and years that excellence is not finite. So the notion that because you're trying to provide some equity in some areas, that somehow that is going to diminish the pie of excellence, it doesn't work that way. So, we will continue to do everything we can and push back on sort of the naysayers in some way, because Montgomery County Public Schools continues to be that place. And just yesterday, I was meeting with some Montgomery College students, and it was just so amazing to hear every one of them say to me, I know we're talking about the college, but let me also say the Montgomery County Public Schools and the high school, there was this one young man who came from New York, and he was like, wow, what a difference, And so that was really touching, because they took the time to actually say, also I have to give a shout out to the school system for everything that they are doing. So thank you so much for.
It's interesting because you hear people talk, and then it's just the type of day it is when you start thinking and reflecting. And I just came back from spring break where we took my daughter on college tours, looking at schools like UC Davis and one of the schools that I attended, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And I think to myself that as a young man, a product of this system, I was able to pick and choose where I wanted to go to school, not just because of the support that Montgomery County Public Schools gave me to be able to be academically successful, my parents as well, but and then also in addition that I now have children who are going through who have the same opportunities. And we can go around to these different schools, even though Daddy and Mommy might not be able to afford some of these schools that are she's looking at unless she gets some big scholarships. But the reality is that those opportunities are there. And we have to give credit for that. And I think oftentimes we just assume and pretend that somehow that just matriculates itself and just comes about and just happens, when it actually is a culmination of hard work of the students, support of the parents, but also MCPS preparation, the great teachers and support staff that we have in our schools who are doing the work and preparing our kids. That's what this is about. And we can't pretend when I walk into schools and I see the proud posters of where people are going to school and where they've been accepted, that just somehow magically happens. It happens through hard work. It happens through every single dollar that flows through this budget. These are the things that make those things happen, right? And so that's why it's so important. So when people want to question and ask, well, why are you fighting for every dollar for MCPS? That's not necessary. They don't need it. Who's they? I know my daughter needs it. I know everybody else's children need it. So they do need it. They need every single bit they can to be successful and competitive in this global world. As I was just on a conference call yesterday talking about early childhood education on a national level and our modeling and what we're looking to do here in the state of Maryland and what other jurisdictions across the globe are doing far beyond what we're doing. Trust me, we need every single dollar we can, because other countries are out there continuing to ramp up. And if we still want those opportunities for our children, we need to make sure that they're at least at the same level playing field with some of those other folks who are doing much more in terms of investment. So we need to catch up and are competing with us when it comes to innovation. That's what these dollars mean, and that's what they represent. I'm sorry, Mr. Howard, but it's just some of the time some of these things need to be said when I read the comments on Facebook and Twitter. And so folks who are watching at home who are sending out messages, yes, I do read them. And yes, I do pay attention. But yes, I also am going to respond when the notions are false. And let me just tell you, I am so proud of our system and the great work that's being done. Mr. Howard. I'm sorry.
I
Mr.
yielded
Dewanda.
all my time to my colleagues, so I'll speak in the questions, but I'm glad you're here. Looking forward to the discussion.
All right, Mr. Howard, on to you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, today what we're going to do is go through an initial review of the larger components of MCPS's FY20 operating budget request. We have a follow-up work session scheduled for May 2nd where we'll talk about the potential additional state aid from Kerwin and also the budget amendment that was announced yesterday that will be forthcoming from the county executive. At the top of page 2, we just have a table that compares the board's request with the executive's recommendation for FY20. The board's request was for $2.662 million, which was an increase of 2.5% from FY19. The executive's recommendation was about $14.5 million less than that, and that same $14.5 million difference carries over to the county contribution, as well as the amount over maintenance of effort. The board's request was $17 million, and the executive's recommendation was $2.5 million, and of course these numbers will be adjusted as we'll talk about more next week. I did want to highlight some of the components of the board's request that kind of help build up to where the budget request is. The board projects total enrollment of 164,477 students for FY20. This is an increase of well over 1,000 students, whether you're measuring it against actual FY19 enrollment or what was projected as part of the approved FY19 budget. So again, as the enrollment continues to increase for MCPS every year, budget dollars are associated with that. Sometimes they are very large. The board's request includes an additional 356 FTE or positions over the approved FY19 level. Primarily, these are teacher positions, which is an increase of 210.6 FTE, and instructional aid positions, which is an increase of 41.9 FTE over FY19. The increase in K through 12 enrollment adds an additional $12.1 million and almost 140 positions to the budget in FY20, while opening a new school and adding grades to other schools also adds $2.1 million and just under 30 FTEs. So the positions added from just enrollment, opening new schools and grades results in 48% of the net new positions requested by the board in FY20. English speakers for other languages enrollment is projected to increase by about 191 students this year, which is a little bit less than some of the other years. But there's a total of 25,823 ESOL students projected in FY20. The budget includes an additional 36 positions and $2.7 million to serve the increased number of students, as well as funds that were added by the board to provide additional programmatic support. For special education enrollment and services, the board's request adds $6.9 million and 85 new positions. And similar to the ESOL enrollment, this is to serve the increased students, but also the board did add money to provide additional programmatic support. And last, as we'll get into a little bit more later on in the packet, the board's request does add $19.6 million and 181 positions for strategic priority accelerators. And this represents 51% of the net new positions from these changes. This is a little bit different from last year's budget, where most of the increase was due to enrollment and there wasn't as much funding requested for the strategic priority initiatives.
Can I just stop you there for a second?
Sure
Because
thing.
that's exactly what we're talking about when it comes to making that difference in the equity opportunity gap. And let me at this time acknowledge Ms. Dixon from our Board of Education, who's here with us as well. So thank you very much, ma'am. I'm sorry I didn't see you. You're right in the line of Ms. Diamond, so welcome and thank you so much for being here. Go ahead, Mr. Howard.
So on page 3, we have a summary of the county executive's recommendation. I won't go too much into that because I think everyone's aware of where that is and how that might change. I did want to go over the table at the bottom of page 3, which shows the recommended FY20 appropriation for additional county support related to MCPS. These are dollars that are funded outside MCPS's budget but help support the programs and services within MCPS. So in FY20, this totals about $315.5 million, and this includes the debt service on school construction, the OPEB pre-funding for retiree health benefits, support services, And support services includes the programs within DHHS, which you'll talk about, I think, tomorrow in the joint committee session, such as Linkages for Learning, school health services, things like that. It also includes the funding in the police department's budget for the school resource officers and the crossing guards. And the last piece we'll actually talk about later today is the technology modernization, which is $10.7 million in current revenue as part of the FY20 budget. On page 4, we have information that we discuss each year related to maintenance of effort and how the budgets impact the ongoing maintenance of effort calculation going forward. The table in the middle of page 4 is actually a table I stole from Ms. Diamond, and it shows the MCPS per pupil funding amounts from FY01 through FY20, and I thought this was a really good graphic that kind of encapsulates what happened over in the pre-recession years, the changes that were made, and what's happened since. So in the pre-recession years between FY01 and FY09, the county funded the school system a cumulative $576 million above MOE, and you can see the increasing per pupil funding amounts that resulted from that funding leading up to that high point in FY09 of $11,249. In FY10 and FY11, during the recession, the council sought waivers from the Board of Education and then ultimately rebased the MOE from 10,200 approximately in FY11 to 9,759 in FY12, and that's the point that's circled in the chart. And as the council president has mentioned, this decision to rebase MOE was a very difficult decision for the council to make, but it's probably one of the most significant actions taken by the council to help put the county back on, stabilize its financial position during the recession years. The council funded the school system at the required MOE level each year from FY13 through FY16, where you can see the curve flatten out. And then in the years since then, the council has approved funding that exceeded MOE by $89 million in FY17, and that was coincided with the funding to reduce class size was the primary component of that. $21.1 million in FY18 and $18.6 million in FY19. And as you can see from the slope of the curve, the council has been very deliberate in making gradual improvements or enhancements above MOE to try to avoid a situation like happened in the pre-recession years where you put a lot of money in and then we have a downturn and we find that that's not sustainable. The board's request in FY20 would establish a new per pupil funding amount of about $10,975, and the executive's recommendation would increase the per pupil amount to about $10,884. On page 5, we have some information on the state pension shift. In 2012, as everyone will remember, the General Assembly required that counties begin contributing local funds towards the cost of the state pension plan for teachers and other employees who participate in that state plan. And we have to contribute the cost, the counties do, without, of course, being able to control the elements of the plan, which is a little bit different from some of the other retirement plans where we pay for them, but we also can make modifications if we so choose to address the funding issues. But the table at the top of page 5 shows the state pension funding in two segments. The first, the phase-in period between FY13 and FY16, where we had to pay the dollars, but they weren't counted towards the MOE calculation. And then the full funding period, which began in FY17, where we had to pay the full amount, and those dollars are now, at least the tax-supported portion of them, is now a part of the MOE calculation. And so the figure that we always cite, and we've kept it in from prior years, but I want to mention it once again, is that with the FY16 to FY17 increase, where in the graph you can see the big jump where we went $89 million above MOE, $300 of the $878 per pupil increase from 16 to 17 was solely due to the addition of the state pension shift in the calculation. So that wasn't additional programs or services provided to students. That's just the dollars that the state decided that the counties now need to pay. And the $54.5 million requested this year in the tax-supported amount to fund the state pension shift represents 3.1% of the board's county funding request. On page 5, we have a summary of the different revenue sources that are requested by the board and recommended by the executive. The only difference between the two, the board request and the executive recommendation, is in the county funding, and that's the $14.5 million gap that we mentioned earlier. The board's requested county contribution represents 65.2% of the total request, and the approved funding for MCPS in terms of the local funding has remained around 55 to 56% in recent years, and that is one of the highest proportions of local funding for public schools in the state. On the next page, at the request of the council president last year, we added a table showing how Montgomery County compares on some of these different things with the other jurisdictions in the state, and this is using data from the Department of Legislative Services. So the county's and this is FY19 data, the county's FY19 total per pupil funding ranked 5th in the state. Our percent local funding ranked 3rd, and we were one of only 4 jurisdictions that provide over 60% of a school district's funding from local dollars. We ranked 4th in wealth per pupil, ranked 2nd in terms of limited English proficient student enrollment, and we ranked 16th in terms of percent farms enrollment. The next revenue issue that we talk about each year is fund balance. So the board requested and the executive recommended $25 million in fund balance be reappropriated as part of the FY20 budget. As part of course, as part of the FY19 savings plan, the executive requested that the board contribute $25 million in fund balance, and the council approved that amount, and the board agreed to that as well. And this is the same amount last year as was requested of MCPS as part of the FY18 budget savings plan. MCPS is prohibited by state law from ending the year as a deficit, so each year they do end with some form of surplus, and these funds can't be used by MCPS until the council appropriates them as part of the next year's budget. MCPS's most recent monthly financial report, which is as of the end of February, projects a total FY19 fund balance of $29.5 million. So while there are still several factors that will impact that final year-end number, staff does feel confident that they will have sufficient fund balance to meet the $25 million FY20 budget target. Oh, and I also wanted to note, as we've discussed before, the superintendent and the board have mentioned that they would like to get to a point where they're targeting a year-end fund balance of between $10 and $12 million, and hopefully that will be sooner rather than later if we don't need savings plans going forward. In terms of state aid on page 7, the state aid increases by a total of $27.6 million, or 3.9% over the FY19 level. This is not including the potential Kerwin money that we'll talk about next week. I did want to mention that the board's approved budget did use much of the additional state aid that came in between the superintendent's recommendation and the board's approved budget request. They used those dollars to help reduce the local funding request. So it lowered the request from $29.6 million that was included in the superintendent's recommendation to $17 million over MOE that was included as part of the board's final adopted budget.
Let me just stop you there and say that this is a prime example of what happens when we have that collaboration that the council president talked about at the press conference yesterday. Having that relationship between our school system and the school board and the superintendent and us means that these kinds of things can happen. Also want to thank our state delegation for their continued work and continuing to support education and understand that it's a priority, and making sure that formulas that are there reflect the need and are trying to answer that call. You know, while we have some of the challenges which are with our pension shift that I talk about at every single one of our education budget forums, it's just very interesting that the pension shift amount for this year is almost the same as the 3 years of above maintenance of effort increase for this year, the year before, and the year before that. If you add them up, it's roughly $50-some million. So it's just very interesting that 1 year's pension shift is the same amount as you have 3 years of increase for great programs that are making a difference. And so that's the challenge that we're faced with, and why we're going to be asking the state to do a little bit more to help us out, understanding that those decisions have a huge impact in terms of our ability and flexibility when it comes to doing creative and innovative things within the system.
On page 7, our next section to kind of go into is compensation and benefits. And I won't go into a lot of detail that we talked about on Tuesday that the council members already heard when we talked about the compensation benefits across all agencies. But I did want to mention a couple things, because compensation benefits are the largest cost components for the MCPS budget, of course, as the primary resource the MCPS has is their people. And total compensation accounts for about 87% of the FY20 tax-supported request for MCPS. We had mentioned as part of the work session the other day, the total 1.8% increase in MCPS's total compensation, and I wanted to break it out into the different components for you all today. So there's a 2.5% increase in wages, a 2.9% increase in Social Security, a 0.9% increase in retirement costs, and an actual decrease of 2.2% of group insurance costs. And the group insurance number does not include the OPEB pre-funding, since that is funded outside of MCPS's budget.
Councilmember Jawando has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this may be, you can tell me who it's for. 2 questions related to the insurance. What explains the decrease this year? How did we go down? Did we just find a better plan, or maybe Nikki wants to answer that? Yeah, okay.
We're actually going to get to that in just a
We're
second.
going to get into that.
If you just want to hold that question. Yeah.
I'll hold. Okay.
We will talk about that.
I have 2 questions related to the insurance, but I'll wait until we get to that.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
So at the top of page 8, we have a chart showing the recommended pay adjustments that are included in the board's request, and this is the second year of a 2-year contract that MCPS has with their employee bargaining units. The total tax-supported cost of the general wage adjustment recommended for FY20 is $17.2 million, and the tax-supported cost for the service increments is $30.2 million. And one difference with MCPS and some of the other agencies is their pay adjustments are all effective at the beginning of the fiscal year. So there's no annualization. This is the full annualized cost.
Let me just stop you right there and just say that I really appreciate the partnership between MCEA, SEIU, MCAP, McBoa, because they have been continued partners with us when it comes to those difficult times in understanding and asking for reasonable contracts, ones that are sustainable for our county, ones that also try to reflect the importance of our teachers and our support staff in our schools. But one of the reasons why on the Kerwin Commission we have the recommendations we do, and what we're seeing in terms of the increase for teachers, is because we certainly do understand that we need to do more when it comes to ensuring that our teachers are a part of that continuum of folks who are lifted up and supported, understanding that the wages have not necessarily followed where they need to be, in not only continuing to retain, but also attract teachers within our system. I know in speaking with our superintendent and our Board of Education, they feel the same way. We play this constant game of affordability versus practicality in terms of understanding that it puts our teachers in very difficult positions oftentimes when they have to make these decisions about supporting their families, and how they can do that living here in Montgomery County if they can, and still doing a very tough job that grows even more challenging every single day. So I do want to acknowledge the great work that our teachers and our support staff in our schools do each and every day, because they are a core tenet of why we make the advances we do in our system and why our children excel the way they do. I will say that it is my hope that when we approach the compensation for all of our county employees, that we recognize that next year we will be entering into negotiations with our union partners. And so from that perspective, there needs to be room. Because if we don't allow for room for growth and just leave it in a couple sectors, then that makes it more challenging for us and limits our ability to really make things equitable across the playing field. And I know that our chair of GO and our council president has talked a bit about this. And so it's my hope that we'll get to that place to where we do have that flexibility, understanding that a lot of these things are going to have to be sustainable moving forward. But, I always compliment Montgomery College for working in conjunction with their labor unions to achieve a very modest increase, one that, oftentimes is seen as less than what we may have from our county employees, but they are partners in understanding that there's a much greater good that we're trying to get to. And so to get to that, it means that folks are going to have to give a little. And I really just want to thank your union partners for understanding that and giving as well. Over the years that I've been the chair of the Education Committee, I've had a great working relationship in terms of making those kinds of decisions move forward in working in conjunction with you and with the school board. And so I really just want to say thank you for that. It means a lot and matters a tremendous amount. So.
On page 8, our next issue is MCPS's pension fund. Mr. Tromka had mentioned this at the work session the other day, but MCPS has a funded ratio of their pension fund, which is 76.7% as of July 1st, 2018, which is a little bit lower than the other agencies. I did want to mention some of the factors that have led to that decrease. First, the pension fund investment performance in recent years has fallen below expectations, resulting in lower than projected fund assets. And then in addition, MCPS did update its demographic and actuarial assumptions. As we talked about with OPEB, sometimes those work out in your favor, sometimes those don't work out in your favor. And this is a case where it did not work out in the favor in terms of, the people living longer, that type of thing leads to higher projected costs in the future. And they also decreased their expected investment return to more accurately reflect what they think will happen going forward. And this is a tough decision that lots of agencies have to make, and to try to be accurate in what your investment returns will be, because when you lower your projected investment return, that increases your total liability and automatically decreases your funded ratio. So they do plan to contribute, each year the required contribution in, with the goal of building their funded ratio back up towards the 100% level that everyone strives to attain. I do want to mention, as part of our long-term recommendations on compensation, we talked about one idea is doing some benefit comparisons across agencies, because there are some differences and variation in what employees receive in terms of their benefit levels, particularly with retirement and group insurance. And one thing that the committee has talked about before is a report from the Office of Legislative Oversight in February 2016, which looked at options to reduce MCPS's pension costs in the long term. And when the committee reviewed that report back then, it did urge MCPS to look at retirement cost control measures, in particular the pension supplement piece of MCPS's pension, with the goal of preserving resources for the future that could be put back into the classroom.
Let me just jump in there, because I think that, again, as we look at sustainability as a whole, and I know I've had this conversation with the superintendent, when it comes to the reason why we did some of these kind of Band-Aid fixes is because we knew that we weren't able to do everything that we could for our teachers and our support staff. But as we look at going in that direction and increasing salaries as per the Kerwin Commission recommendations, it certainly is time in which we look at these other things that we've put in place and whether or not they are still appropriate, given that we're headed in that kind of direction to where we're paying folks more appropriately. I don't know if Ms. Diamond wanted to chime in terms of that, but it's certainly something that I'd like to encourage strongly the school system to continue to look at. I think that, again, as we make a commitment to moving forward with supporting Kerwin, we will need to see some adjustments that are made just to support overall sustainability for MCPS's budget. Dr. Smith.
Yes, Mr. Rice, I appreciate all of your comments about the issues of compensation, the fact that next year we will have 3 open contracts that will need to be negotiated, and we're in a very tight labor market. It's even tighter in the education field than it is in the general labor market. And certainly as the state looks at restructuring how teachers are paid and the systems, would be an ideal time to look at how the pension between the local and the state work together, and that 1999 legislation that is in place, and just making sure that we think about how all of these things fit together and the impact on how we use that money. Because I think your point about the fact of the money that we've asked for over maintenance of effort in 18, 19, and 20 equal what we've been paying to the state pension system, and we also have that supplemental local pension. So all those things make perfect sense, and we don't want to lose that through line as we think about the total restructuring of this in the Kerwin work. And I appreciate your membership on that and strong voice there for that business.
So our next section on page 9 is going into more detail on the group insurance and OPEB. And thank you, Councilmember Jawando. I think you're the first person who's ever been excited to talk about group insurance with me. So I mark this as a win in my book. So the FY20 request, the board's request includes $295.3 million in tax-supported funding for active employee and retiree pay-as-you-go group insurance benefits, which, as I mentioned, is a decrease of 2.2% from FY19. The total funding, when you look at all sources, which I'll talk about in just a minute, is essentially flat with FY19. So what I did in the table on page 9 is I included different lines for both active and retired employees for the amount that's requested from tax-supported dollars, the amount that MCPS plans to use from their fund balance by drawing down, so we don't need to put new dollars in because we have excess fund balance to use to pay for a portion of this year's claims, as well as in for retiree pay-as-you-go benefits, the amount that would be coming from the OPEB trust this year. So in terms of the ability to draw down on the group insurance fund balance and why the fund balance has increased in recent years, each year the board sends a letter to the council by April 1st, which provides updates information on their group insurance and retirement funds and where things stand. So over the past few years, the MCPS, as well as county government to a lesser extent, has experienced medical claims trends in both their active and retiree health accounts that have been lower than projected. So claims are still increasing, but the rate of the increase has been a little bit less than we had planned or budgeted for. So at the bottom of page 9, I pulled out some of the factors that they pointed out as helping to lead to those reductions. So the first is that the trends in MCPS medical claims have been lower than the market industry trends that were used as part of rate setting. So that's where some of those dollars comes in. The second is in FY18, so across a couple different fiscal years, MCPS did consolidate plan vendors from 3 to 2. So they achieved some one-time savings from that consolidation. The third is that they attribute some of it potentially to their wellness program. And while it's very difficult to determine, to isolate out the impact of a wellness program from other aspects that affect group insurance, MCPS does recognize that the low trend increase may be partially attributed to the wellness program's impact. And the wellness program includes, as we discussed the other day, the cost share credits of 1% each for employees to do a health risk assessment or biometric screening, and also the tobacco surcharge of 25%, which is a very substantial amount, of course, and has brought them down to, I think, 4% of employees this year who are paying the tobacco surcharge. So it has decreased, ideally, hopefully it's decreasing the folks who are using tobacco and potentially decreasing our long-term obligations associated with some of those health riskier behaviors. The last aspect is when they consolidated vendors, the charges, allowable charges by the Care First vendor to healthcare providers for services performed is lower than what was allowed by prior vendors, which then decreases the amount of funds needed to pay claims.
Councilmember Jawando?
Yeah. I know there's another page here, but I can chime in now, and if you get to it. One of the things discussed here, and thank you, that's really helpful, and it's good to see the trend is going down. Hopefully that continues. cost share amount, I know you're going to get to that, so I don't know if you want to.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so, you know, this stuck out to me, and it's related to my other question. It says here that if MCPS had the same cost share as county government, it would result in a $25 million savings, and I know it seems like this has come up in past years, the discussion of occurring you to align your cost share, and have we made any progress on that? Are we moving in that direction? I guess that's a question for Ms. Diamond, maybe.
So there are two aspects to that. One is that while our employees have a different cost share than the county government employees, our retirees do as well. So our retirees pay anywhere from 36% of the share to 50%, so they actually pay more than county government. And our employees pay, on average, 14%, but it could be as low as 12%. And so while there is a difference in our employees, our retirees actually balance on the other side. So we have talked about it. Certainly, it's part of our negotiated agreement, so it would require negotiations. We spent a lot of time during our last set of negotiations talking about cost savings, and I think what you see in the results here over the last 3 years is while we didn't change our cost share to yield savings in that way, we did a lot of other work. The consolidation of our vendors and incredible work that all three of our associations and unions did with us to bring down the costs of our plans achieved as much as we would have achieved in terms of savings. So we did change the cost share amount in terms of the penalty paid for those that are smoking, and so that did change the average. We did talk about and change some of the payments in terms of how much we pay when we, not the premium amount, but what we pay in terms of the deductible, and you see that last bullet there around the costs that employees pay when they go out of service is now, because of Blue Cross, a higher amount. So we did achieve savings, but just in a different way.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, so that future conversations could be had as we enter into next year, potentially for even further savings. If I'm reading
Absolutely.
between the lines there.
It's still part of negotiations,
Okay.
and certainly we can talk about the how that would play out. And we always bring up all the different ways that we can work together with our associations.
Wonderful. And then related, this is pre my time on the council, which has only been 4.5 months, but I remember a discussion about another way to potentially drive down costs by combining county employees and school system employees into one universal pool. That was an idea that was thrown out in 1 year. So I don't know, is that, have you discussed that? Is that idea, whoever wants to address that, you know?
So that stems back to the recession years in around 2011 and 2012 when some cost control ideas were discussed. We had a work group consisting of employees staffed by council staff and consisting of representatives from different agencies. That work group looked more at combining the administration of all the different group health plans as opposed to combining all the employees into one pool, because those would be two very separate kind of tasks, you might say, to do that. What that group found was that combining the administration of the different plans would not really would not yield a significant amount of savings, because since most of the plans for all the agencies are self-insured, the primary cost driver is just the cost of the claims that people have, then the administrative part is a relatively minor piece. There were some recommendations from that work group for the agencies to focus on some of the data analytics around healthcare and to look at some of the different what are the different costs within each health program that are driving the claims, and see whether there are things such as wellness programs or more direct interventions from healthcare providers to people who have kind of long-term reoccurring chronic conditions that could help reduce costs over time.
So the idea of everyone in one pool wasn't really broached and looked
It was
into.
not.
Okay,
It was
because obviously the basic economics of it, you have a bigger pool, you can negotiate for better rates potentially, and that's the idea with, but okay, so that hasn't necessarily, that wasn't looked into specifically.
It was not specifically, no.
Okay.
Although I think one thing that I would add is that when we do go to RFP, we work together. We may choose and work with different vendors, but we do work together as we work with the different healthcare agencies. One of the reasons you'll see, and we analyze our data on a monthly basis, so we look at all of our costs and what our drivers are and how we can bring those drivers down with our wellness team and with our finance team. One of our ways that we've been able to save a tremendous amount of money is to really look at those drivers and to attack them through our wellness programs. So we have special programs for diabetic care, we have special programs for weight loss and smoking attestation responses. But we also have a lot of turnover because we have a lot of young teachers, and that does impact our overall costs. We know that our younger employees do not go to the doctor as much. And so we do have some savings that you'll see in Montgomery County Public Schools that you might not see in other agencies. And that's part of the reason why I think we've yielded some very low costs over these years by really taking advantage of and Care First giving us very good pricing because of our population.
That was the whole thing with the mandatory in the federal debate, is that you needed the young people because they have to drive down the, they help drive down the cost. What's the ratio of young people, the age? Because it's different from county government, where I think we tend to be.
So when you think about the fact that we hire approximately, and in any given year, anywhere between 900 and 1,300 new teachers, as well as other support staff. If you think about our teacher workforce, it's across the board, all teacher level positions, about 13,000. So just in first year hires, we're hiring a significant amount of, and not all of them are first year teachers right out of college, but many of them are. So we have a very young workforce, especially in our teacher ranks. And so that does impact our healthcare costs. Our wellness program has done a tremendous amount as well, because we have been able to really narrow down where those cost drivers are, whether they be with prescription drugs or with certain types of illnesses. We've worked with our drug reps to get rebates and to work through different programs, and that has also provided us a tremendous amount of savings over the last 3 years. It's kind of important to note that when Dr. Smith walked into this position, one of our first meetings, he asked me about the healthcare fund, and the healthcare fund at that point in time
He shares my excitement and enthusiasm.
Yes, he did. It was in the negative, which is not something you want to share with your new boss. And it's not something the new boss would like to hear. And so that I had just walked into the position as well. And so we've been able to, since that period of time 3 years ago, really put in a lot of great measures by working very closely with our unions and associations. Our Board of Ed has been diligent in keeping us on target and looking at these cost savings. And so I think we've done some work, and there's certainly more to be done, and we'll continue
Well, I
to
appreciate
look.
that. And just in closing, I just think it's so important. Such an important and large part of our budget. And if we're coming in and we're trying to say, how are we more efficient? How are we maximizing costs, but also making sure we're taking care of our people? It's just a continual conversation of looking at ways to be improving and being more efficient. So I look forward to partnering with the school board and with you all, trying to find ways to do that.
Council President Navarro?
Yeah, thank you. So this is very important conversation, and I think that, as we were discussing last Tuesday, in my opinion, the real work that we have to engage in is really to take a step back and look at those structural pieces that really, contribute to this notion of sustainability. So I hope that as we do that, it would be really great to look at what has been the experience of the school system with the wellness program, for example. I know there are a lot of research out there saying that they don't really make a difference. Montgomery County government has not yet, I think, done a thorough evaluation. So if you have any data, that would be really important. One of the things that I kept emphasizing to our team during this budget cycle when they were preparing packets about comparisons for negotiated agreements and benefits was this issue of parity. What does that really mean? Because of what Ms. Diamond was just describing, you can't, there's no apple to apple comparison. So you might have the school system, that has negotiated certain rates and certain aspects of the health insurance, but it's, perhaps balanced through what you're doing with your retirees. The county government has done something different. And so it is important, I think, especially as a new council is grappling with this notion of sustainability, to take a look at what all of those elements are. And if there are some things that we could all learn from, then we can push that. But sometimes we get really excited when we see a particular data point, but it turns out that, the structure of all of these benefits are quite complex, and everybody has negotiated something a little bit different. So I think that's part of something that we really do need to take a look at. So I do appreciate, Mr. Howard, as you were working on the other packets, really taking my request into consideration to really describe this issue of parity and how it is not so simple. So just really want to, express that. And so if you do have any data on your wellness program, on the tobacco cessation, because that is not something that the county government does, it would be awesome to include all of that as we do the sort of post-budget conversation and analysis around, this notion of sustainability. Thank you.
Okay. On moving along to, I guess I should mention that the OPEB pre-funding, we talked about that the other day. That's outside of the MCPS budget, but the executive does fully fund the actuarial evaluation for OPEB for MCPS. However, there is the continued use of $27 million out of the trust to pay current pay-as-you-go expenses. The executive does add an additional $9 million to the pre-funding to begin to offset some of that 27.2. So the gap this year is lowered to $18.2 million, which is progress. On page 11, we have information on some of the programmatic enhancements, and these are the dollars associated with the strategic priority accelerators that I mentioned earlier. The table on page 11 is just breaks them down by some highlights that the MCPS provided as part of their communications with the public and with the council. There's about $16.2 million that fall into the learning, accountability, and results category, $460,000 into human capital category, $430,000 into community partnerships and engagement, and then $2.5 million in operational excellence. On pages 12...
Let me actually just stop you there because I want to highlight something that a lot of people in the community have talked about. And there are a couple, but let's go back to human capital and strengthening school safety and student security with improved background checks of staff. I know that's been something that we've had multiple meetings on. And so can you just talk a little bit about what that entails and what the school system is looking to do with that regard?
Sure. As you all know very well, the world continues to evolve around these areas. And when I started teaching in 1980, there were no background checks. In Maryland, about 1986 was the initial effort around background checks. So we had employees who were pre-1986, and the laws grandfathered some of them in, and then those have grown and included fingerprinting as time has come forward. And so this effort really is to bring standardization and a high level of integrated security around all employees through two efforts. One is to essentially re-fingerprint everyone in the system. And we looked at doing that over a cycle every so many years, because then if something has happened in the interim since you were hired, that would show up. The good news is we're in that process right now, but we're only ever going to have to do it once because of a new program at the federal level that fingerprints will now be kept in a system and will be available. So if a fingerprint hit does occur in the future, then we'll know that without having to re-fingerprint someone. So that's a significant improvement at the federal level and a significant improvement for us. So by the end of a 3-year cycle, we will have re-fingerprinted everyone in the same way we have been fingerprinting all new employees for the last several years. The second area is to do the Child Protective Service background checks on everyone again and cycle through that system. And so by doing both of those things, it gives us a more integrated, full picture, and it gives us an ongoing way to be aware of events that happen after the date of hire of a person in the school system in any role. And we've also added significant levels of training every year for every employee in many areas, but this one very vigilant and careful in this particular area, and that everybody has this training not only about what's appropriate with children, but also if you see something, you say something. You are not the judge or jury, you're simply the person who says, I have a concern about this and I need to say something. And we look at all that data very closely on a very regular basis. In fact, I hear about it personally weekly. And so I know where we are weekly, both with the reports of child abuse. And I would point out that the vast number of child abuse reports, the vast number of them in the system, are school people reporting circumstances in the community, not of school people. But we are very serious about the work we do in this area and have continued to upgrade that and will continue to upgrade it as technology and opportunities present themselves.
Well, I think it's important, and I know that our parents, folks in the community who are just generally concerned that continue to see, big stories like what the Boy Scouts just announced, the unfortunate challenges in the Catholic Church. It continues to be things where you realize that it doesn't matter if you're an entity that's out there. You may, in fact, have some people who act inappropriately and do inappropriate things with our children. And it's very unfortunate and it's tragic, but I don't think that anyone is immune from it. And so having practices that allow for you to ensure that you can react quickly, but also that you can avoid employing people if they already have a history of those things is incredibly important. I do just want to remind folks that it doesn't mean that you're always going to avoid it. You never know when a person's going to decide to make that kind of decision to prey upon a child. And it doesn't always happen before a person gets employed with the school system or with the Boy Scouts or becomes a priest in the Catholic Church. Those things don't always happen before they get there. And so from that perspective, the procedures that we have that are in place that are vigilant in terms of seeing something and saying something and reporting it and then letting the process play out, I think is a very smart one for us. And we're starting to see a lot of folks paying a lot of attention to this in a national spotlight. And so we want to be on the right side of this. So I really appreciate the work in doing that. I did just want to highlight one more thing, and I hope I'm not stealing one of my colleagues' thunder. Well, then I'll leave it. No, I'll leave it because that's a good one. Then I'll pick another one because these are all really important. So I don't want to gloss over these because these are a part of what it is that's making us a better system. We do great things every single day with the majority of our funding, but how we grow and how we adapt to the things and what's happening in the world are a part of these, strategic accelerators. And so when we're talking about expanding pre-K, and I'm not going to talk about it too much because the council president may want to talk about that, but with focused teachers in impacted schools, right? Being out front of Kerwin, this is one of the things that was a primary component for us in Kerwin. And saying that for some of our at-risk schools and for our students who needed it most, we needed to have folks who were going to be able to really drill down and help and assist those children. That's a game changer. It really is. And this is something that, again, we're pulling from global and national models that are out there. And so to have that as a part of the budget, to grow that contingency, understanding that those are the things that are making the difference when it comes to our equity and opportunity gaps is just very wise and says something about the dedication you have in making your system even better for those students that are at promise or at risk. So, did you want, please?
I just add one comment. When you look at the very first bullet, reduce class size in elementary schools, that's all elementary schools. So in fact, not only non-focus or lower poverty schools will change the class size guidelines. That doesn't mean there will be one fewer child in every classroom. In fact, the vast majority of our classrooms in the elementary school are under the guidelines. 90-some% are under the guidelines or at the guidelines. But what that does mean is that in focus schools and Title I schools, that will also happen. So those are tiered, but we'll also bring down those guidelines in Title I schools in focus schools and then in our non-focus schools. So it's really those two bullets work together to get ever more attention to each individual child, no matter which school they go to. But I wanted to point out how those fit together.
Let me turn to Council President Navarro.
Thank you. So first, I do want to thank the members of the Board of Education for these really important items. I think they're very well balanced, and I think they totally respond to what we have not only heard from parents, families, but also I think what the staff is always talking about in terms of where to strategically invest. And so I wasn't sure if we were going to go through these items because I think it is critical for the listening audience to hear the millions watching at home to have a sense of where these dollars are going. And it's important too because yes, I mean I know how overwhelming it is to sit at the Board of Education table, really trying to balance in your mind where to put these dollars, what to prioritize, and I will say that I totally recognize a lot of these items from my time way back on the board, and so it just shows that there are some very specific operational issues that don't go away. As a matter of fact, as the enrollment growth, it always becomes imperative to continue to keep up. So this issue of counselors and the assistant principals, I mean, these are, items that I know every year are so important. So again, if we're going to go through them, I think I just wanted to make sure that that was the case. One real quick question, when we look at the packet at the beginning, talked about the ESOL population, 25,823. I know that we always discuss this data point of, I think in the past I had heard that I think over 65% or so of ESOL students were U.S. born, and I wasn't sure if that, has remained the case or if you have any new data around that issue, which I always use it as one of those very important indicators as to why we need to invest in the early years, because children who are born here perhaps are not exposed to language-rich environments, and if they were in quality early care and education settings, they would be exposed to language-rich environment, not necessarily English-rich environment, language-rich environment, would then helps them become English proficient very quickly, but that always stood out for me. So I wasn't sure, as you've seen some of the growth, if that remains the case.
The number does actually remain in the 60s as
Okay.
far as U.S.-born children, and I would point out that's the number out on that day that was served according to the legislative counting at the state. We also have a number of families who don't accept services. And we also have a large number of students, about 7,000 typically right now, that have recently exited in the last 2 years. So when you actually look at the overall English language learner population at all points along the continuum, you're up in the low 30,000s of numbers of students, and but still it's in the 60% of them are born in the United States.
Great.
And we are also exploring dual language pre-K opportunities in our pre-K programs.
Thank you so much for saying that, because again, I know that there's just a lot of different interpretations out there. The bottom line is that this data point is so critical for this notion and this initiative of the dual language programs, where then language is an asset. At the end of the day, if we could lower this number of students that have to go into ESOL,
That's right.
then it means savings, but it also means that these are students that are going to be able to move very quickly through the system in terms of their academic achievement and not feel like somehow in ESOL and being remediated, that does have an impact. So this is one of those innovative ways to address this issue, because there is a disconnect out there of thinking that because you have these number of ESOL students that somehow these are recently arrived children. These are U.S. born children.
That's right.
And it is up to all of us to find out ways to begin a downward, I think, a trajectory so that they don't have to be in ESOL, so that they can just come in and very quickly acquire English, move forward, and move ahead. So thank you for, again, the board, as well as with you and, also our employee unions for collaborating so well on this issue of dual language expansion, on this, notion of trying to do everything possible to address the needs of these U.S. Born U.S. citizen children. This is, I think, a really important point.
And if I may, I just, you have spurred in me something I always try to say, and I want to say this morning: language is an asset. We should only ever think of it as an asset. And last night I was at the college tracks end-of-year celebration, and the young woman who is the anchor for Telemundo was speaking to the students as the mistress of ceremonies, the master of ceremonies, and she was talking about how she operates completely in Spanish in her job. And she was born in the United States, raised in a family, and because her family valued language and made sure she had that learning, she now has her career and is able to fully operate in 2 languages all the time. And that's a profound asset. And as I'll point out, and you all know this, but I love to say it, we had last year almost 1,500 students who walked out the door with a diploma with a seal of biliteracy. They're fully literate in 2 languages on their diploma, on their transcript, and as a credential to offer in the community, the state, and the nation for employment, for scholarships, for opportunities. And we expect to exceed that number again this year. And I see no reason why half of our graduating class in the future cannot be have a seal of biliteracy, at least on their diploma. It's profound what's possible here.
And it's a global economy.
That's right.
I mean, the bottom line is that if we could offer the opportunity to all of students to graduate with more than 1 language, that just multiplies your marketability when you're out there looking for jobs. I see it with my daughters. I see it with many students who have been able to either go through language immersion programs. That is the bottom line. And, many articles just recently talking about the purchasing power of, for example, the growing Latino community. These markets continue to grow. And so it is interesting to me when people become so defensive when somebody is bilingual or somebody, posts something in a bilingual fashion, because everybody should have that opportunity. It just totally exponentially expands your opportunity to be out there and to be marketable and to really offer all of that. I am so grateful to my parents for having, come to the United States when I was 10 years old, when my dad was doing graduate work at the University of Missouri-Rolla, and I learned English in 6 months. I went back and my dad said to me, "You need to keep that up. I don't know how you're going to do it, but you need to keep it up." And I did, and so I am so grateful that I can operate in 2 languages, 2 worlds. And in my household, we have 4 languages because we have French and Creole. And it is just, in my opinion, a very an extraordinary experience, an asset to give to our children. It is very enriching, but again, in this global market and in this global economy, it just makes complete sense, So I'm really excited, and I see that there will be some world language expansions here too, so that's really cool too.
And trying to reach every child, and we'll continue to add
that.
dual language schools and language expansion at the elementary, because the developmental and neurological benefit to any brain as a child or young adolescent to study language is profound. And what the neuroscientists are determining these days is showing really significant positive effects on the human brain when it has the opportunity to work in multiple languages as a young child, early adolescent. And then if you do that, you're fully biliterate by the time you're an older adolescent, which ought to be our goal for all children.
Yeah, I experienced that firsthand, as it was so easy for me to learn English. And then I tried to learn French after, getting married and all of that. And it was not the same. I'll only leave it at that.
Before I turn to Councilmember Joando, let me just echo that, and Dr. Smith, let me just tell you that I'm very excited to see one of your cohorts with the seal of biliteracy be my daughter, who's been taking her Spanish classes and challenged us this weekend when we were on the college tour. We just said, you know what? For the rest of the day, let's talk in Spanish, Dad. And it was quite challenging for me, remembering all of the words and phrases and sentences, but it's one of those things that Council President Navarro said. It's very funny how your brain doesn't work the same as it did before when you were much younger. And, but it matters so much. It really does in communication. It really does in terms of, my wife and my daughter who my youngest is taking French because she's wants to study culinary arts. And so we said, look, if you're going to decide between the two, French is a much better option for you from that standpoint with the rich culture and culinary that France has. And so, but again, it's about expanding options. It really is one of those where it allows you to go to some of our Caribbean nations, our African nations as well, to where, French is widely spoken. So there's so many opportunities that are out there all throughout the world. And giving our students the opportunity to do those kinds of things is incredibly important. And so I hope that's a good segue to Councilmember Jawando's comments or questions.
It is. Again, I'll say it again, my favorite committee. I couldn't agree more. Being slightly older than a middle-aged adolescent, or I forget the term you used, but one of my goals is to increasingly use and acquire Spanish while I'm here. I've talked with several people about that, for my first interview the other day, almost completely. Everyone was speaking almost only Spanish to me, and it was great, and they were very impressed at how I'm progressing. So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited about the expansion and the access that you're going to get to all students eventually, and we're moving in that direction. We often talk about how many languages we speak in Montgomery County and how great it is, but then somehow there's this disconnect when we talk about using it in the it's like it's a great thing until you get to the point of like using it in formal ways and acquiring it in other ways. And so I think we still have some work to do here in this experiment that is America to make sure that everyone understands the value of that and the marketability and the economic value of it. So I couldn't agree more. Similarly, as Councilmember Rice was mentioning, I'm really excited that you are going to take over Summarize. And with that, also expanding the dual enrollment with Montgomery College. As you know, Dr. Smith, I think these work-based learning opportunities in the summer, but also during the year, and internship opportunities we need to get more students these opportunities. And from my experience, and I want to thank Councilmember Rice when I was sitting there 3 years ago asking for money to run up Summer Rise, and we did it, and now it's going to live on with you and expand and grow. I can just tell you, so many of those 500 students that first year, rising juniors and seniors, had never had an internship, never knew that this was a possibility. Some have been hired as firefighters. The list goes on, and we're just scratching the surface on exposing kids to these work-based learning opportunities and what's possible and getting them thinking about what's possible. And so the dual enrollment, the Summer Rise, the internship program during the year, you can comment on this. We really have to find ways and consider us a partner to expand these work-based opportunities. It's an economic imperative. It's an equity imperative for our students. And I'm glad you're going to be moving forward this year, but I would love to hear your ideas now and in the future about how we can expand the internship programs at the school during the year and coordinate those better with summer opportunities, and how you see that functioning together, because I just think it's such a critical component.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I absolutely think one role that the council could play and the county government could play would be to build incentives and ways for businesses, nonprofits, other groups to engage in this. And I just was so taken the year you're talking about when we started Summer Rise, and all of the work that you folks did around Summer Rise, to stand at that end of year celebration and hear so many adults say, I was so nervous about this. I wasn't sure this was going to work, but these students were fantastic. They were better than my employees.
Right.
And I think finding ways to entice our employers, no matter whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, any way that we can do that so we can create more opportunities in the county for people to open their doors to adolescents would be a wonderful thing. So if there's any, and I think incentives sometimes are, tax credits and things like that, but there are all sorts of incentives that don't have to necessarily be monetary or whatever, but creating a structure where it's desirable to take in high school students into your business in their area of interest, because they either find out they are interested and go on and do that work, or they find out they're not interested, which is invaluable to also know.
That's exactly
so
right.
I would just really cheer you on and work with you any way we could do that to create incentives in the community for companies that are hesitant or nervous to say, we could do that. We could do that for 3 students, 5, 10, 15. But you heard those same testimonials.
Yeah, no, and I think
people.
that's exactly right. We will do that, and I think all my colleagues share your interest in doing that. We had to shut down. The student interest is there.
That's right.
We had to shut down registration after a week because 1,000 students applied, and we were only limited by the amount of opportunities. So we need to.
And we continue to have that experience right now today, is that we have more students than we do of opportunities, and we're continuing to scramble to find opportunities and then match our students to the actual opportunities that they express interest in.
So to the millions watching, if you're an employer,
That's right.
Summer-Rise, go to the Summer-Rise on the MCPS website, sign up to have a great student and have a great experience. Thank you for that.
And thank you very much, Councilmember Joando, for your leadership in running that program. It certainly is one that's done tremendous things for young people in our community, and certainly one in which we need to continue to figure out ways to expand so we can reach to many more of the students who we know will be able to benefit from that. I wanted to, before I turn it over to Mr. Howard, I think that the Council President raises a great point. So, Mr. Howard, if we could actually go through each of these and just list these accelerators, because they are incredibly important. Or actually, I don't need you to do it. I can do it. I don't have to have you. I mean, because they are incredibly important. And if any of my colleagues just want to jump in, or Dr. Smith or Ms. Evans as the president of the board, I know these are your requests, your suggestions that reflect your recommendations and what you're seeing and hearing from the community. If you want to weigh in on any of these, please, at any point, just jump in and stop me. But from reducing class size in our elementary schools to implementing the year-round programming at 2 elementary schools, that's at Roscoe Nix and at Arcola, right? So, I mean, which is tremendous. These are things, again, that are in the recommendations of the Kerwin Commission, recommendations of what we see globally when it comes to ways in which we can continue to reduce the summer slide, the great work that Council President Navarro did when it came to working with the Bell program. It's those kinds of things that we know make a difference when it comes to our equity and opportunity gaps. Expanding pre-K, we've talked a lot about that. Adding the focus teachers, we mentioned that. I am chair of Education and Culture. We are the Education and Culture Committee. And expanding the Arts Initiative program to elementary schools, this is, again, incredibly important. I can't tell you how many parents have come to us and said, we continue in bad times to take away from the arts, and we never give back and build back up. And here's an example of where we're doing that. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, because it, again, is talking about and highlighting how important all of these are. As the father of a young daughter who's in the arts, it is something that is incredibly important, and I know has an impact on our students and their ability to shine. The programs and support staff for students' physical, social, and psychological well-being. We chose, our council member, student council member for the day, based on this. Her essay was based on the social and emotional well-being of students in school, understanding how important that is, and focusing on school climate and culture, another thing that's incredibly important, as well as making sure that we've got assistant principals to provide more instructional leadership, working with our teachers and our support staff. Converting some of those assistant school administrators to assistant principals at secondary highly impacted schools, and the world language that we talked about. One of the things in home capital, something that I'm a huge fan of when you talk about growing the diversity of our workforce, especially when it comes to our teachers, is this one with expanding the career pathways and professional opportunities for employees to ensure that that we're seeing that diversity. That program is tremendous because a lot of people who've kind of reached the end when it comes to support staff, and there's not much more you can do besides go to corporate, if you will, to the management side, but don't want to do that. They still want to be there in the schools with the students, working with them. They enjoy that each and every day, but can do something different. If you were a cafeteria aide, but now you want to be a para, you want to work with students, and because you're doing it already, the social and emotional well-being, it's interesting. When I talk to my daughter about who she talks to at her middle school, she talks to her cafeteria aide when her friends, girl cliques can be difficult. And I'm not trying to be sexist. It's just something with being the father of two girls. It's just one of the things that I hear a lot about, and it's tough. And so having those kinds of things and having a person to talk to, and that's the person she chose to talk to, is important, right? And so having that training that's there for everyone and making sure that they all know, but also knowing that if they want to take their skills to the next level and do something a little bit different, and supporting them on that is tremendous. Did you want to weigh in on something? Yep.
On that point, on the couldn't agree more on the psychological and social emotional well-being. We hear that from students time and time again. I spoke to all the student government students. That question came up time and time again. I know part of this budget is to expand the psychologists and keep those ratios. They're still high, but keep them from going higher. But I was very impressed when I met with Dr. Bryce about the work that you're going to do to make sure all of your staff, whether it's the cafeteria worker, the bus driver, everyone has base level of training to be able to engage and be an outlet and a resource for students. We don't want to be dealing with it when they're at crisis level. We want to create as many opportunities for them to talk to people before. So you can talk about that if you'd like, but I think it's important to know that all employees are part of your goal is to get everyone that is interacting with our students some level of training so that we can improve on that social, emotional, and mental health aspect for our students.
Actually, at the May 14th board meeting, we'll be presenting a framework and a digital platform that we've constructed that goes right to what you're discussing. And that tier one is everyone, every adult knowing, understanding how to interact with students and help students with those day-to-day issues like Mr. Rice was describing with his daughter. Tier two, having the more intensive supports in the school. And then tier three being a good bridge to the community when community supports are needed that are more complex and more. So we're building that out, and we'll be sending that like we send all of our work to you in that week of May 14th so that you'll have access and be able to see it all. And
I didn't mean to preempt the board discussion,
Nope,
but I guess
good.
I leaked some information, but hopefully that was
No,
okay.
it's good. They've been hearing about that it's coming for a year, so it's on its way.
And then, of course, last but not least, some of the technology improvements to continue for professional development and support for our schools. And I know this means a lot to our teacher cohort. It means a lot when it comes to really giving them more so that they can continue to grow in their craft. Something that, again, we focused on when it came to Kerwin recommendations and making sure that we focused on professional development opportunities for our teachers. So having these kinds of things that are there and woven in are incredibly important. Again, and I want to say that out of the $65 million that you had recommended in increases from the board, $20 million of that is strategic project accelerators, what we're talking about today. So roughly almost a third of what it is. And that $65 million includes compensation. I mean, so to really, I hope folks understand, and this is why I think it was incredibly important, and thank you, Council President, for recommending that we go through this, because oftentimes what we hear from our community is folks think MCPS is just doing the same thing that they've been doing and doing the same thing over and over again and nothing's changed. Well, that's not the case. There's money that's going in, and while we want to do more, right, some of these are doubling down. Some of these are things that we've done before, and we're growing and enhancing what's already there, right? Summer Rise was something that was committed to by the school system when it was first done, and now you've taken on the whole program. So you've taken it from being a partner in the program to actually taking it on yourself. That's expansion. That's expansion of opportunity. These are the kinds of things that I just want to make sure that our public is seeing and understanding. is happening within our system and happening within this budget, which is why, like I'd said before at the outset, every single one of these dollars matter, because they do go to affect and support all of these myriad of programs that we just spent the past 30, 45 minutes talking about. So, Mr. Howard.
So I think this kind of brings us to the end of the initial overview of the FY20 budget request. On pages 12 and a little bit onto 13 was just a little bit more detail on some of those programmatic enhancements that we've discussed, and just provide some of the dollars and positions associated with each, so you can know that that's there. The last two issues to discuss today are moving on past the FY20 budget overview, and the first is in section 5 on page 13 is an FY19 supplemental appropriation request related to new curriculum. As the committee discussed last year at our year-end fiscal update from MCPS in September, there was an unusually large carryover fund balance, unappropriated fund balance of $6.8 million. Usually it's much smaller than that. That was higher than typical because the board and the superintendent had decided to reissue its RFP for a new curriculum. So funds that had been budgeted and appropriated in FY18 were not spent for that, and then the board wanted to wait until it reissued the new curriculum and went through the RFP process again before selecting a vendor for that. And the plan at the time was when that occurred, they would send over an FY19 supplemental asking for the council to reappropriate some of that unappropriated fund balance to provide those dollars for them to spend. So the board did submit that request on March 25th in the amount of $4 million, and it would be used to purchase textbooks and instructional materials that are related to the new curriculum that the board adopted. Since the request is to reappropriate unappropriated fund balance, it would have no impact on MCPS's FY19 MOE calculation or MOE going forward, because it's just dollars that have already been appropriated but hadn't been used, and just we need to take some administrative action so they can be used as part of the FY19 budget. So staff's recommendation would be to, as soon as the council receives the formal recommendation on this request from the executive, that we schedule it for introduction, followed by a joint public hearing and action to allow them to make those purchases.
Turn to Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just on this was obviously a huge issue in the community when we had to send back and decide. Now, I know the board heard a lot from folks about what choices you were making. One of the things when we moved to the Common Core and Park was a big issue was with teacher adoption and training and knowing and having access to the materials. My understanding is that is happening sooner in this process. Could someone talk about that? Who you select, just how that's going to improve? Because I think community is concerned. Some are concerned about that.
Sure, we're right now in the acquisition phase. The math and language arts curricular programs have been selected and identified pre-K through grade 8. And we're in the acquisition phase right now, and actually waiting for the supplemental to complete that. As soon as that is available, and that'll be this spring, and we'd like to get that done as soon as possible, we'll make that information available to all teachers. And the first cohort of schools in each area, language arts and mathematics, will begin next fall. And so rather than a produce and deliver the moment before you have to teach it, everybody will have access to it. We're in full training mode right now, and have already done a lot of the training this spring, and we'll continue to do it all the way through the spring and through the summer. So there'll be a lot more professional learning about this prior to it, and then over 2 years roll it out to all elementary and middle schools, cohort 1 and cohort 2. So schools are in cohort 1 for math or cohort 1 for language arts, and they'll be in cohort 2 for the other area. And it's a very systematic, integrated process that we've done. And the training so far have been very, very good. I happened to stand in the back of the room in a mathematics training a few weeks ago, and it was impressive what's being done in
That's
that area.
good to hear.
So
Obviously the adoption.
I heard a lot about the in-the-moment delivery from 2010,
I'm sure you
11,
did.
12, so we made sure we built that feedback into the plan.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much.
Council President Navarro.
Thank you so much. So one of the areas that I was very interested in, and I think I did send a letter expressing this as the board was looking into the new curriculum, was this notion of how does it reflect, and address issues of diversity and inclusion and reflecting the history and content areas that would obviously resonate with the majority of the student population, given that many curriculums do not tend to really incorporate many of those types of elements. And I've heard over and over again from so many students, that they literally went through Montgomery County Public Schools and felt like they did not see their history reflected in a lot of their curriculum. Was that something that has been considered as you, of course, now moving forward to purchase the textbooks, et cetera? Was that something that was looked into and addressed?
That was built in from the very beginning, and so even the feedback and the conversation well before the RFP was sent out, it was embedded throughout the RFP process, and then in the actual selection. And I know Ms. Dixon spoke very eloquently at the board table as it was being adopted about looking at the materials and being so pleased to see, as a career educator, the shift in the way we approach that. And I don't know if Ms. Evans, if you want to share your thoughts about the materials, but it's been a real point of focus for us.
Right. No, the board was very pleased that we felt like this curriculum was very culturally responsive. And we heard from a lot of our students and our parents wanting to make certain that our students could see themselves in the curriculum. We had some students come to a business meeting recently discussing the curriculum, and we were able to share with them that exactly what you're asking for, you will see that in this new curriculum. So no, we were very pleased. We also were pleased to know that there's a parent component in there. So our parents have information and materials that they'll be able to use to be able to support their students' learning. So the board was very pleased with this process, and we're looking forward to getting that approval from you to be able to start the process for our teachers and our students.
Thank you so
in the
much
fall.
for all that work, and I can't wait to see sample some of the materials. I'm sure my daughters would be very pleased to see that, because they were some of the most vocal advocates back in the day, and even today, as they continue to move through, college and the job market, they continue to reflect on how they don't see themselves reflected in so many different aspects. Of course, I think that's why they went to Howard University, because it's a little bit of a different experience there, but they do reflect back, and I know that it means a lot to student engagement, it means a lot to validation, it means so much for our student population to have that opportunity. So thank you very much for making that a priority.
Councilmember Jawando?
And I'm glad the council president raised that issue. Obviously, Ms. Evans is working on ASAG. This was a constant recommendation from our group that, as well as the other groups, that there be more culturally representative and inclusive curriculum. Several of my colleagues, both of my colleagues here and several others, we have worked on this Remembrance and Reconciliation Commission that's going to look at some of the history of Montgomery County, and that this, people, we had African Americans who were dragged out of this building years ago and lynched right outside, and some of the unfortunate history, but it's history nonetheless that we need to remember, especially now, so that we learn from it and don't repeat it. I'm also interested in just bookmarking this for you, pun intended, to incorporate more of our Montgomery County history. And I know there's some of that's happening in pockets with teachers and other folks, but if in a more intentional and structural way, we can try to build some of that in, and hopefully the curriculum allows that type of flexibility. But I think those processes should be kind of working together, so.
All right. We're going to go ahead and move forward. I am going to have to step away for a moment. I'm going to turn it over to Council President Director.
Okay, so Mr. Howard.
All right, so our last issue is the technology modernization on the bottom of page 13. And each year, the committee reviews the technology modernization CIP project during the operating budget because the project is primarily funded by current revenue. And the approved FY 19 through 24 funding string for the project is shown in the table on page 13. Technology modernization is a key component of MCPS's strategic technology plan, and I've listed the different items it typically funds related to technology. One thing I didn't put on the list, and I should have, is it also has helped fund different technology initiatives related to MCPS's security efforts. Some of those things that roll into technology have been funded through this project. The executive recommends the same overall funding for this project as requested by the board, but he does recommend a funding source shift in FY19 and FY20 between current revenue and recordation tax revenue. So under the shift, the recordation tax funding would increase by $10.3 million in FY19 and $6.3 million in FY20, while the current revenue funding would decrease by that same amount. So same total amount, just different sources of funding, and council staff recommends approval of this proposed funding shift.
Okay, is there any objection from my colleague? I
Okay.
think from both of us, it'll
And
be
then-
yes.
The very last issue is the E-rate federal reimbursement that MCPS receives each year, and usually that comes late in the year in April or May. So this is an FY19 reimbursement, and it's anticipated to be $1.4 million this year, and the board's tentatively scheduled to act on this at its April 29th meeting. In recent years, the council has made this additive to whatever TechMod funding had been previously approved. Council staff recommends the same approach for this upcoming FY19 supplemental, and similar to the curriculum, what we would do is, assuming that the committee is okay with that, we would, as soon as we get that, we would schedule it for introduction and public hearing action, so MCPS is able to receive that money before the end of the year.
All right, we okay? So we are okay with that recommendation as
Okay.
well?
And
Is
that's
that the end?
that is it.
Okay, well, once again, thank you. I think this is a great discussion. We look forward to the upcoming work session where we'll take some votes, obviously, regarding the budget, but I do believe that our constituents can rest assured that this is a very well-balanced, well-rounded budget request, and that we're going to definitely continue to see a lot of advances and a lot of great outcomes as well. And so once again, I want to acknowledge the work of the Board of Education staff, the superintendent, and leading a lot of this, and of course, Mr. Howard for always preparing awesome packets. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you so much.